Looks like I'll be trapped in this white void for a while. Don't know how I woke up here, or when I'll get out of here, and it also seems like escaping this place is impossible because it stretches on for infinity. It's also pretty easy to get lost in here. I could be somewhere else and far from here, and it won't be any different from where I last was. Guess they don't call this an endless void for nothing. God damn it, Ween. So I guess it looks like I'm gonna have to kill some time while I figure out even more ways to get out of this shithole, and fail miserably at them. Anyway, so I've been catching up on Spy Family recently, and while it's a great anime and all, watching the first season got me thinking what everybody else is thinking. Hey, I should really watch those Mission Impossible movies. I hear the new ones are pretty good. And so I did. The Mission Impossible movies, aka the Tom Cruise death-defying stunt show. That's right, everyone. We're finally going to talk about the man, the myth, and the legend himself, Simon Pegg. Oh, and also the guy from Top Gun. Now, the first thing you should know about these movies is that they're all based on the old TV series of the same name. Originally aired from 1966 to 1973, spanning over 7 seasons, plus a continuation in the late 80s, the show generally follows the Impossible Missions Force, aka the IMF, a group of top-secret government agents taking on missions that no average spy would be able to accomplish. The show was originally led by Stephen Hill's character Dan Briggs in the first season, before the rest of the show saw Jim Phelps as the main character, played by the late Peter Graves. He would also return in the 80s revival as one of the main characters, and even appears as the main antagonist of the first film. Spoiler alert. But yeah, more on this later. It should come to no surprise that the Tom Cruise movies have been massively successful with critics and audiences alike, transforming a beloved espionage television series from the 60s into one of the best action movie franchises to date. And while these films are now well known for the realistic stunt work and amazing action set pieces, let's just say it took quite a while for those films to get there. Not many people seem to realize that this franchise has had quite an interesting evolution over its 28-year run, with the first few sequels wildly contrasting in tone and quality, thanks in no part to some big-name directors using this franchise as an excuse to work with Tom Cruise. One would even argue that the films don't get good until 3 or Ghost Protocol or Fallout. Also, this is my first time watching every single one of these movies, so keep in mind that my thoughts on these movies can change over time. So, while I'm out here staring in the face of death, let's talk about staring in the face of death. Oh yeah, and spoilers for everyone who hasn't seen any of these movies yet. The first Mission Impossible movie is interesting to talk about, to say the least. Directed by Brian De Palma and released in 1996, this is more of a suspense, espionage, psychodrama thriller, and focuses on IMF agent Ethan Hunt, played by Tom Cruise, who is framed for the murders of his entire team after a mission to stop the rogue agent goes wrong. When Ethan finds himself on the run, he then enlists the help of 2 disavowed IMF agents, an arms dealer, and this French fashion model to clear his name and prove himself innocent by retrieving the knock list, which lists down every IMF covert operative and their codenames. As I mentioned earlier, Jim Phelps appears in this movie, this time played by John Voight instead of Peter Graves, and serves as the mentor/leader of Ethan and his IMF team, who at first looks like he got killed in action alongside the rest of his team, but as it turns out, actually faked his death and went rogue himself, betraying Ethan by outing him out as the mole to IMF director Eugene Kittredge, simply because he believed that he was becoming a worthless asset in the aftermath of the Cold War, or something. Yeah, the plot's all fucked up. The scene where Tom Cruise hangs in the CIA building's pretty cool though, right? Yeah, when I said earlier at the beginning of this video that this franchise has had quite an interesting evolution over the years, this is what I mean by that. In a way, it's kind of funny that an espionage thriller that's as paranoid and schizophrenic as it is would pave the way for one of the longest running action movie franchises in cinema history. But then again, what else were you expecting from a Tom Cruise spy movie directed by the guy who made Carrie and Scarface? This is definitely one of the more serious installments in the franchise. It's a tense and anxious slow burner, filled with twists and betrayals at every turn, that this movie's famous hanging scene almost feels like it was pulled from a completely different and sillier spy movie. Also, I swear to God, this movie has more Dutch angles than Battlefield Earth. It's also worth pointing out that this film is infamous famous for its plot twist near the end where Jim Phelps is revealed to be the bad guy, which led to nearly the entire cast of the original show, including Peter Graves himself, bashing this movie for making such an insane creative decision like that. I'd argue, though, that this film is more about passing the torch down to a new generation. As mentioned earlier, the reason why Jim Phelps turned bad is because he thought he was going out of style, which explains why he became a traitor to his own service. And also, I don't know, he got bored. He's also seen mentoring Ethan Hunt and his team throughout the film's opening minutes, as you can see a young Tom Cruise being more like an intern of some sorts, before becoming the team leader Daredevil in the later movies. While it's still an insane move to make, to turn the protagonist of the series into the main villain, regardless of whether or not the filmmakers were fans of the original show, it still works as sort of a coming-of-age story for Ethan Hunt's character and his own IMF team, operating completely free from the influence of Phelps and the old IMF. Or maybe Brian De Palma just simply hated the original series, I don't know honestly. I'd also argue that the film's climax hasn't aged all that well, considering the franchise's emphasis on realistic action set pieces many sequels later. Like, you look at the train fights in Dead Reckoning, and marvel at how they were even able to pull this off, compared to this one where everything just feels like they were filmed on a green screen set. But I still love this scene, and I know all this was way before Tom Cruise started trying to kill himself for our own entertainment. In fact, all the action scenes and effects in this movie are still well done and hold up many years later. But going back to stuff like this now really makes you appreciate how far they've come since then. Mission Impossible 2. What the fuck? The best way I can describe my thoughts on this movie is that it starts out like it's gonna be one of those good bad movies. You know, the type of movie that you know is kinda shit, but you still love it ironically for how stupid it is. Like, it starts out with an epic pre-9/11 plane hijack and Tom Cruise climbing around mountains as part of his daily morning routine, followed by some sunglasses exploding and me thinking, this movie is gonna be so fucking dumb. And then the rest of this movie is virus jibber jabber and Thandie Newton getting sexually objectified by everybody.
I'm dying to see if I remember your size.
Also, there's a bunch of cool action scenes near the end with some motorcycles and doves. The guy from Banshees of Inisherin and Anthony Hopkins are also in this. But admit it, you're probably gonna forget they were even in this by the time I finish this sentence. I consider Mission Impossible 2 to be the black sheep of the franchise. It's such a wild contrast compared to the last one with its half-baked plot, slow pacing, and a script that just screams early 2000s. So it made perfect sense that the guy who directed this movie was none other than John frickin' Woo. What? No. Ain't no way, man. Ain't no fucking way. Next thing you'll tell me is that the new metal-ass soundtrack was composed by Hans Zimmer. Oh, what the fuck? On paper, John Woo and Tom Cruise are actually a perfect pairing. They're both action movie legends from opposite sides of the world, and famous for their emphasis on stunt work. I just wish they either made this movie better, or worked on a better and completely different action movie. Here's hoping to reunite for Silent Night 2. So, the plot of this movie is about a virus. It's called Chimera, and Tom Cruise, he has to capture it with the help of a thief, who's not the thief from the new movie, and then he has to go up against another rogue IMF agent, who almost looks like he's modeling for GQ. And then he has the cure, or something. It's always nice to see little kids with crayons writing scripts for big-budget action movies. It's just so inspiring. And the dialogue, holy shit. I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review, and I'll mention it again. Did Reiji Miyajima write this? I asked this because the dialogue is shockingly way more misogynistic than I remember.
I don't do laundry, cook, or put up with cheeky bastards who set me up on their territory so they can poach your mine.
I don't know what else to say about this one. If Paramount at the very least allowed John Woo to go a little more unhinged with this one, like what he did in his other Hollywood movies like Broken Arrow or Face Off, or generally any of the films he made back in Hong Kong, then this could have been such a fun, dumb, early 2000s popcorn movie, instead of what feels like a massive gaping wound in an otherwise great action franchise. In a way, it reminds me of Quantum of Solace, another dud in a popular spy movie franchise, more specifically Daniel Craig's run as James Bond, both of which also tried to be darker and edgier than their predecessors, but ultimately ended up being so dull and lifeless, they can basically come off as filler. If you marathon these movies in one go, you might notice that the later movies barely call back to this one, and it's easy to see why. This could have dealt with the consequences of Ethan's actions in the last film, but nope, he got over that pretty quickly. Ultimately, it just feels like an average day for Ethan Hunt, and not even a Limp Bizkit song could save it from being so mid.
Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall.
Released in 2006 and directed by pre-Rise of Skywalker and Lost finale of J.J. Abrams, Mission Impossible 3 is where the films really start to find their footing. Definitely not set after the events of Mission Impossible 2, Ethan Hunt is retired from the IMF to live a normal life with his fiancée Julia, played by Michelle Monaghan. But then he's called to return to active duty to take down yet another arms dealer, played by the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, who proves himself to be one of the most ruthless villains in the entire franchise, as he breaks Ethan down psychologically and threatens to kill Julia without any hesitation. As always, there's also a MacGuffin, this time taking the form of a biological hazard called the rabbit's foot. And the movie will do whatever it takes to constantly remind you what it's called.
The rabbit's foot.
The rabbit's foot.
The rabbit's foot. The rabbit's foot.
The rabbit's foot.
The rabbit's foot. What is a rabbit's foot? What is a rabbit's foot?
What is a rabbit's foot?
This is arguably the most personal and intimate film in the franchise, with a greater emphasis on the line dividing Ethan's personal and professional lives more so than the previous films. There's times where it feels less like a spy movie than the previous two, and more like a sorta tragic love story between Ethan and Julia. We get to see more of Ethan's life outside the field, and it helps in fleshing out this character so well. The stakes remain just as high as ever to the world, but they seem a lot higher this time to Ethan himself because of how much it affects his own life outside of the spy world, which is probably why I consider Philip Seymour Hoffman's character to be one of the best villains in the entire franchise. At first, he comes off as a generic arms dealer that the IMF has to capture and stuff, but what separates him from the other villains thus far is his cold and psychopathic demeanor. It's like if Todd from Breaking Bad was a global terrorist instead of being the meth-cooked nephew of a neo-Nazi. The scene where he tortures Ethan and his fiancée is also some of the most anxiety-inducing scenes in the entire franchise, and even more so as it takes up the film's opening minutes. Oh, and also there's this douche working with the arms dealer who's also a rogue IMF agent, and he just fucking dies. Yeah, I don't remember his name either, but it's okay. You don't need to either. I consider Mission Impossible 3 to be the turning point of the franchise, where the film started to rely more on Tom Cruise's cardio workout, dangerous stunts that are entertaining as hell, multiple exotic locations, and the triumphant debut of the man himself, Benji Dunn.
You're on Interpol's most wanted list, and that, by the way, is a spectacular list to be on. I think I like my job, okay? A lot. All right, and you know they're going to be taping this call. Maybe we can share a jail cell together, you know? If this all goes tits up, which it will.
Best movie sidekick ever! So even if this film feels like the saddest Spy Family episode ever, it's still a massive improvement over the last two films, and a stepping stone for what the franchise would become from there on out. Also, wait, is that Jesse Pinkman? Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, the one with Paula Patton. Released in late 2011, the film sees Ethan and his team going on a mission in Russia to stop the bad guy from John Wick from getting his hands on some launch codes, only to get framed for an attack on the Kremlin. This causes them and the rest of the IMF to get disavowed by the US government, leaving Ethan and his team to finish their mission without any resources or backup, and hopefully clear their names in the process. How many times have they done this by now? I think it's ironic that this film has such a high-stakes plot regarding nuclear fucking warfare, when it's actually one of the breezier and lighter films in the series, and I think you can attribute that to the fact that this film was directed by Brad Bird, a Pixar veteran responsible for some of your favorite childhood films. And for a Pixar veteran directing his first big-budget live-action movie, it actually paid off pretty well, compared to other attempts at least. There was also at least one or more memorable action scenes in each installment, and Ghost Protocol shows no exception. From the holographic hallway scene that remains one of the funniest scenes in the entire franchise, to the genius of the double fake meeting scene in the Burj Khalifa. And of course, there's the scenes where Tom Cruise made Dubai his bitch, whether he's running from Sandman from Spider-Man 3, or climbing up the Burj Khalifa all by himself. Everyone who was watching this when it came out in theaters, myself included, may have imagined this being one of the deadliest big-budget action sequences ever put to film. But we were clearly not ready for what was to come. It's a great film and all, but I would argue it's kinda weak compared to the other films that would follow. Oh boy, here comes Natsumi again with the bad takes. First he said Love Live Sunshine was mid, and now he thinks this film's aged badly. Yeah, Yeah, I know. I'm that kind of guy, Sumi. Hear me out, though. I haven't seen this film since it came out in theaters, and I still think it's a decent entry upon rewatch. But I can't help but feel like this film has been completely overshadowed by the game-changing stakes of the later entries that would follow afterwards, and even more overshadowed by the impossible mission, haha, get it, to be as good, if not better, than MI3. Consequently, I just feel like the villain and plotline don't really hold up all that well in retrospect. They just feel so weak compared to the more personal stakes of the last film, and it's kind of jarring in my opinion that this film followed up the ruthless and cold arms dealer of MI3 to some Russian nuclear dude. That car fight is actually pretty sick. But once again, who cares? Because all that matters at the end of the day are the stunts and the masks and absolutely nothing else. And also Benji Dunn. I would die for you, Benji Dunn. The first film in the franchise to be directed by Christopher McQuarrie, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation introduces the Syndicate, a network of rogue agents around the world led by this British guy, Solomon Lane. The IMF is also shut down once again by the Boss Baby, leading Ethan and his team to stop the Syndicate with the help of a disavowed MI6 agent before it's too late. Oh, and also Ethan's on the run again, I guess. Guess that guy just really likes running in general. I see Rogue Nation as the franchise's paradigm shift, setting up many elements that would be expanded upon in the next two movies, from its team lineup to stunts that always manage to top the last one. And while the opening scene where Tom Cruise hangs from a plane is insane and all, I don't think enough people talk about how it was even more insane that Christopher McQuarrie filmed Tom Cruise nearly drowning underwater for our own entertainment. Even James Cameron would shit his pants watching this. Not that I'm complaining, but Jesus. I'm actually struggling to write anything new for this one, and I mean that in a good way, because I really love many of the chases and action sequences all throughout this franchise. But I can add that I always love how each installment always tries to be crazier and better than the last one. From the hilarious and intense car chase in Casablanca, to the infiltration inside the opera, to the scene where the IMF confronts the prime frickin' minister. It's just good stuff, man. I guess if I had to point out some flaws in this one, I'd probably say that once again, the villain and the whole syndicate stuff isn't really well fleshed out. Apparently they're supposed to be the anti-IMF, which on concept sounds amazing, having the IMF go up against an evil version of their own team, but that's not what actually happens. Nah, instead we spend a lot of time with the MI6 agent I mentioned earlier, and her name is Ilsa. Not Elsa. Ilsa. Her name is Ilsa. She's undercover as one of the Syndicate agents, I guess, but at the same time, she's also working against the Syndicate, but her allegiance to either team is all over the place. Like, sometimes she'll work together with Ethan and his team, and other times she'll betray them for no reason. Like, there's one scene where she's trying to snipe down the Chancellor of Austria, who's watching the opera, which Ethan prevents, even though it becomes pointless when the Chancellor dies in the car explosion. Guess a lot of people in this franchise are just really unlucky with cars. There's also a really cool scene in the airport where Ilsa tells Ethan to run away with her while his team do a bunch of play-by-play commentary. There's also a ledger that's really important in the movie because it proves the Syndicate's existence or something, and both Ethan and Ilsa need it for different reasons. So Ilsa gets the little ledger thingy and brings it back to her MI6 guy, but he's like, "Can you hang out with those funny little Syndicate guys more?" Which Ilsa does, while the MI6 guy, he erases the ledger, and then he turns out to be the creator of the Syndicate. That was supposed to be like the UK IMF, I guess, but I guess it was too crazy of a plan that even the Prime Minister hated. I should really stop watching these movies for the plot. But perhaps my biggest issue with the movie is that they nearly killed Benji Dunn. I love this character so much that when the final act of this movie was dedicated to him getting kidnapped, strapped to a bomb, and forced to be Solomon Lane's little chatbot, I was like, no! Don't you even dare lay a finger on my boy, you stupid British man! Anyways, fun movie. Oh yeah, and remember what I said about this franchise always topping the last one with each new installment? Yeah, about that. Mission Impossible Fallout is one of the best action movies I have ever watched. And I've seen all 4 John Wick movies. This movie sees a mission gone horribly wrong once again after Ethan chooses to save Ving Rhames instead of getting their hands on some giant plutonium pinballs before the Apostles, aka the Syndicate 2.0, do. With the world under threat from yet another nuclear attack, Ethan and his team set out to finish the mission themselves, at first getting some help from CIA agent August Walker, before he switches sides halfway through like a game of CSGO and tries to kill them. I feel like the main reason this movie is widely considered to be the best one in the series is because it also feels like the most quintessential film in the entire series. What I mean by that is that it takes all the best elements from the previous 5 movies, refines them, and puts them all into one package. From the intense, slow-burner psychodrama of the first one, to the personal stakes and the return of Michelle Monaghan's character from 3, to the live-action cartoon sensibilities of Ghost Protocol, and literally the main villain from Rogue Nation, who now looks like a mentally ill caveman. There's even a bit of a callback to 2 when Ethan and Superman fight on a mountain. In a way, this movie feels like a bit of a culmination of all the other Mission Impossible movies thus far. It has the best stunts, the best action, and dare I say, the best masks in the entire franchise. And for a franchise that was like 6 movies in at the time, that's a genuinely impressive feat. I imagine this is the type of movie other long-running franchises would look at and say, what the fuck are we even doing here? In fact, during filming, Henry Cavill refused to shave his mustache for this film while doing reshoots for Justice League, a decision that pretty much brought the DCEU into a downward spiral.
Henry Cavill had to film Mission Impossible.
Henry Cavill's the guy playing Superman.
Yeah.
Whoa.
In order to do that, he has to maintain the growth of his mustache. So, what's a sensible movie producer's best idea at hand is to basically, I don't know, digitally. It's hard to explain, really.
Digitally remove the mustache.
It's hard to explain without gagging a little.
It looks
Upon first
horrible.
viewing, it looks horrible. It looks
it looks
dreadful.
really bad.
It still haunts my dreams to this very day.
Simply speaking, this movie was so good, it killed another franchise. I'm actually struggling to figure out if my favorite Tom Cruise movie has to be this or Top Gun Maverick. They're both some of the best action movies of the 21st century, and also some of the best action sequels ever made to that extent. But then again, I haven't seen Top Gun Maverick since it came out, so maybe I can come to a final decision after a rewatch. What else can I say, man? This is peak. The performances are peak, the action scenes are peak, Vanessa Kirby is peak, Simon Pegg is peak. Peak, 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 peak. Mission Impossible Fallout is the franchise at its absolute peak. Which begs the question, considering the franchise's tendency to top the last one, is it possible to top Fallout? Yeah, probably. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. From the Book of Saw, a Star Wars story, the school idol movie over the rainbow, and Knuckles. Hey everyone, this is Natsumi from the future. I would also like to point out that the title for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 actually changed when it dropped in Paramount Plus very recently. They actually removed the Part 1 subtitle. Probably because the movie didn't make back its money. Poor Tom Cruise, man. Deserves better than this. The movie follows Ethan and his team hunting down their deadliest enemy yet. AI. But not just any AI. Evil AI. Woo! So evil, in fact, that it was enough to convince Joe Biden that AI actually might be a dangerous threat to all of society. And maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not here to judge. I mean, they make pretty funny pictures sometimes. This movie surprisingly had a pretty troubled production. There was a controversy going on about destroying a polished bridge for the movie. Add to the fact that a large chunk of this film was shot during the peak of the COVID pandemic, which proved to be quite a massive challenge for everyone involved. Just ask the man himself, he'd tell you.
We are creating thousands of jobs, you I don't ever want to see it again! Ever! And if you don't do it, you're fired! And I see you do it again, you're gone!
And last but not least, the film's budget inflated so much during production that it barely made its money back. And maybe also because it came out 1 week before Barbenheimer. Although personally, I'd rather blame Sound of Freedom for the movie's underperformance. And it's such a damn shame because I still think it's a great movie. I think it's pretty safe to say that this franchise hasn't had a stinker since 2, and that streak is going to keep going until the end of time. It also makes a great use of its long-ass runtime by padding it out with awesome action scene after awesome action scene after awesome action scene until the very end. It's also surprisingly very topical and timely in terms of how the movie addresses AI and its impact on global security. Although I'd be lying if I didn't say Sing a Bit of Harmony was the better movie about AI. Stop trying to make movies about AI, you're never gonna top Sing a Bit of Harmony, and that's a fact.
ちょっと来い。
どこに？
天野のところだ。
やったー！その気になってくれたんだ。
But how is this movie compared to Fallout? Is it better than Fallout, or not as good as Fallout? Yeah, honestly, I feel like I should leave that for you guys to answer in the comments section down below. For me personally, I'd say it's slightly leagues below Fallout. Don't get me wrong, this movie still kicks ass, but aside from the mountain bike fall stunt that was pretty much the movie's main selling point, there's surprisingly not a lot of action scenes that are as good as the ones in Fallout. They're still great on their own, believe me, but I can't help but feel like this is the first time where the action feels like a bit of a downgrade from the last one. But then again, topping Fallout was straight up impossible, so whatever. I also think it's very funny that this movie has a lot of beautiful women in it, and yet Shea Wiggum's character stood out amongst all of them. The film wants you to believe that he's hunting down Ethan as part of a manhunt to retrieve the evil AI, but in reality, he's probably just really gay for Ethan.
He's the one you want! I don't care about him, hon! I want you!
Oh yeah, and there's a guy named Gabriel in this, I guess. I mean, honestly, we don't really learn much about him aside from being somebody from Ethan's past, but I'm gonna assume they're saving all of his backstory for part 2. If the next one's still even a part 2 by that point. That's right, it's one of those movies where it feels like one half of a story that won't even get finished for a couple more years. Good to know Hollywood's bringing back the two-parter trend from those YA novel movies many years ago. Aside from some nitpicks and just being not as peak as Fallout, Dead Reckoning is still a fun time at the theater, which you probably never experienced because you were too busy with Barbenheimer instead. And those were the Mission Impossible movies. What a franchise! Regardless of your thoughts on these movies and Tom Cruise as a person, I think the best thing about this whole franchise is how it allows Tom Cruise to stay dedicated and passionate about keeping the movie industry alive and well, even if it means he has to try and kill himself to achieve this goal every time. And on that note, I'd like to end this video by letting you all know that today, I have learned that Spy Family and Mission Impossible actually collabed not too long ago to celebrate the releases of their new movies. It's glorious. It's almost like this whole video was building up to this very moment.
ミッションインポッシブルといってな、対外情報機関 CIA の極秘諜報部隊 IMF と呼ばれる絶対不可能なミッションを遂行する部隊に所属するエージェントイーサン・ハントの活躍を描いた映画だ。
And as much as I would like to really see where the story of Dead Reckoning goes from here, it's gonna be a while until the next one comes out. But in the meantime, at least we have stuff like 007 Road to a Million and Argyle. Yeah, these movies are all we have left, don't we?
Ani